Right now, the United States and Europe are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into a railway in Africa to reduce their dependence on China. There's just one problem. That railway may end up running on Chinese trains. And once you see why, that contradiction is just the surface of something much bigger. This line runs through landmine territory, was abandoned for decades, and cuts across some of the most isolated regions in Central Africa. Yet governments, mining giants, and superpowers are fighting over it. This is the Lobito Corridor, and it might quietly decide who controls the future of the global battery economy. Let's start with some geography, because this matters. The heart of Central Africa, specifically the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia, sits on what geologists call the Central African Copper Belt. It's one of the most extraordinary concentrations of mineral wealth on the planet. The DRC alone controls roughly 70% of the world's cobalt supply. Cobalt, the element that goes into almost every rechargeable battery in existence. And copper, the metal that electrification runs on, is everywhere here too. The problem has always been the same: getting it out. Right now, this copper and cobalt leaves by truck on a 45-day journey through some of the worst infrastructure on Earth. Imagine sitting behind the wheel for weeks, inching through potholes, border crossings, broken roads, armed checkpoints, tropical heat, and endless traffic jams just to reach a port thousands of kilometers away. And there are reportedly around 15 illegal checkpoints between Kolwezi and the Zambian border alone, where drivers pay bribes just to keep moving. The current logistics network is completely broken. The Lobito Corridor promises to fix that. A fully operational rail route would cut that transit time down to roughly 2 days. 2 days versus 45. That's not an incremental improvement. That's a transformation. But this railway isn't new. These tracks were built in 1902 by the Portuguese Empire for one purpose: to move copper outward to ships on the Atlantic coast. The rest of the story can wait, because that historical cycle keeps repeating. By 2002, when Angola's devastating 27-year civil war finally ended, the railway was barely functional. Only about 34 kilometres, less than 3% of the line, still operated. The war had destroyed everything. Then came China. Between 2000 and 2024, Beijing pumped a staggering $49 billion into the country under a massive oil-for-infrastructure arrangement. Angola paid with crude, China built with concrete, and out of that massive line of credit, around $1.2 billion went directly into completely rebuilding the Benguela Railway. Plans were drawn up for 67 stations, trains running at 90 kilometers per hour, and a capacity for 20 million tons of cargo. It was incredibly ambitious, and then largely it just sat there, underutilized, underfunded, and mostly forgotten. The kind of project that looks massive on paper, but dies in reality. Until the ground beneath those tracks suddenly became more valuable than gold. By 2022, the battle over this railway was no longer about the tracks. It was about survival in the global green energy race. When you pull up the corporate registry records for the Central African Copper Belt, one statistic completely dominates the data. Chinese companies now control more than 70% of the major copper and cobalt mining operations in the Congo. And the deeper I looked, the bigger that footprint seemed to get. Not just the mines themselves, but processing facilities, transport infrastructure, financing, logistics. Entire sections of the battery supply chain already run through Chinese companies, long before the minerals ever reach Europe or North America, which suddenly makes this railway feel very different. Because at first, the Lobito Corridor sounds like a transport project, but increasingly, it started looking more like an attempt to redraw the map of the global battery economy. The United States and Europe aren't just worried about access to minerals, they're worried about dependence. In late 2023, the US, the EU, Angola, Zambia, and the DRC signed agreements making the Lobito Corridor a major strategic priority. Joe Biden even travelled to Angola personally to support the project, the first sitting US president ever to visit the country. Officially, the language was about development, investment, and regional growth. But reading through the policy papers and strategic briefings, it became pretty clear that another concern was sitting underneath all of it: China already dominates huge parts of the extraction network, and Western governments suddenly seem very aware of how difficult that could become in the future. In late 2025, the investigative NGO Global Witness published a report that should have caused a lot more noise than it did. Using satellite imagery analysis, they found that the rehabilitation of the DRC section of the Lobito Corridor, specifically the stretch between Kolwezi and the Angolan border, could put up to 1,200 buildings at risk. That's around 6,500 people who may face displacement. Homes, schools, lives, built right up against the colonial-era tracks. The legal situation in that zone is deeply ambiguous. Buffer zones and property rights in the Congo are poorly documented and inconsistently enforced. Leonard Zama, a local NGO director who supported the investigation, put it plainly. The affected communities are simply not being informed, calling the project more political than developmental. When Global Witness pressed for clarity, an EU official said resettlement plans would be addressed during feasibility studies that are still being planned for 2026, meaning construction is already moving forward, while planning for the people in its path hasn't. That pattern, build first, plan later, has a long history in infrastructure projects across the region. And historically, when that happens, local communities are the ones who absorb the cost. In some places, the ground beside the tracks is still dangerous. Not metaphorically, literally. Decades after Angola's civil war ended, parts of the corridor still pass near uncleared minefields, hidden in tall grass and remote countryside. So you end up with this strange overlap. Engineers planning billion-dollar logistics infrastructure, while humanitarian organizations clear explosives from the same ground. And that process is slow. And beyond the landmines, beyond the displacement, there's a deeper structural critique that keeps coming up. This railway is being sold as development, as opportunity, as a path to prosperity for Angola, the DRC and Zambia. But if you trace the path of the cargo, the underlying model starts to look very familiar, because the Benguela Railway was built in 1902 to move raw materials outward to global markets. And if all the Lobito Corridor does is make that process faster, what exactly has changed? Several European development groups and independent analysts have raised this concern. The higher value stages of the supply chain, refining, processing, manufacturing, still sit far from the source. For this to be genuinely developmental, those countries would need to capture more of that value. Right now, the corridor is optimized for something else. It's optimized for throughput, and that creates another layer of risk. Because for all its scale, this entire project still depends on political decisions being made thousands of kilometers away. And in 2025, those decisions suddenly shifted. When Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, his administration's sweeping foreign aid freeze hit the Lobito Corridor almost immediately. American aid and development programs, transparency initiatives, support for local farmers along the corridor, anti-corruption efforts were suspended. Nearly $20 million in supporting programs went dark. A Senate Democrats report warned that the freeze, combined with delays on the core US government-backed loan, could derail the entire project. For a moment in early 2025, the corridor that was supposed to be America's great strategic answer to China in Africa was in genuine jeopardy. But then something interesting happened. The Trump administration looked at the strategic logic. Critical minerals, logistics security, countering Chinese infrastructure dominance, and decided this project was too important to abandon. In December 2025, the US government finally approved the massive $553 million financing package. The Development Bank of Southern Africa added $200 million. Total package, $753 million. The corridor was back on track. The framing, though, had changed completely. Under Biden, the Lobito Corridor was sold as a climate transition project, a green logistics artery for the minerals the green economy needs. Under Trump, the exact same project got reframed as a geoeconomic instrument, a way to cut China out of critical mineral supply chains. Same railway, completely different story. That reframing tells you something important about what this project actually is. When the political winds shift and the project survives anyway, that's when you know the real interests underneath it are durable, but significant risks remain. One European development think tank warned that the corridor's economic projections may be overly optimistic. There are upcoming elections in Zambia in 2026 and Angola in 2027 that could bring policy shifts. The ongoing rebel conflict in eastern DRC, while geographically distant from the corridor's main route, has already disrupted ministerial coordination meetings that had to be rescheduled from 2025 to 2026. And one of the most pointed critiques, the corridor's commercial viability currently depends heavily on a single mining operator, the Kamoa-Kakula copper complex operated by Ivanhoe Mines, a company with significant Chinese investment. The Western alternative to Chinese mineral dependency is, at this moment, commercially dependent on Chinese-backed mining. If this works, if the full Lobito Corridor is built, if the Zambia extension is completed, and if the DRC section is properly rehabilitated, the potential is truly extraordinary. Transport costs for copper and cobalt could drop by 30% or more. Transit times collapse from weeks to days. Millions of rural Angolans, Congolese and Zambians who currently have no reliable connection to markets could finally access them. The informal traders, the local farmers, and the small businesses along the route stand to benefit in ways that no corporate press release has ever truly captured. And if it doesn't work, if the financing fractures, the politics shift, the commercial case falls apart, or the communities along the tracks are left unprotected, then this simply repeats a century-old historical pattern. It is a model that began in 1902, with a colonial railway built to drain African resources outward to European ships. It is an economic loop that continued with an oil for infrastructure deal that left Angola heavily indebted and the tracks underutilized. Ultimately, it is a cycle where the continent's immense mineral wealth generates extraordinary returns for everyone except the people living right on top of it. Following site visits from 9 international engineering firms last month, the final multi-billion-dollar construction bids are landing on desks as we speak. The commercial machinery is spinning up, and the project is officially moving from paper to heavy steel. Every version of this story eventually ends at the same place, the Atlantic Ocean. After thousands of kilometers, the copper arrives here, loaded onto ships, and disappears toward factories and supply chains on the other side of the world. And standing back from all of this, I kept coming back to the same uncomfortable thought. For all the language about transformation, strategy, and development, how much of this system was actually redesigned, and how much of it simply got faster? The Lobito Corridor will probably get built. The money is too big, the strategic interests too entrenched, the minerals too necessary. But getting built and getting it right are two different things, and in the history of African infrastructure, those two things have rarely arrived at the same time. The communities along the tracks deserve better than being studied in a feasibility assessment that hasn't happened yet. The countries whose land this crosses deserve more than being transit routes in someone else's supply chain strategy. And whatever story gets told about this project in 20 years, as a success, a failure, or something more complicated, it will be told against the backdrop of choices being made right now. Frankly, I find that unsettling, and I think you should too. If this kind of deep dive into megaprojects and the difficult questions underneath them is what you're here for, there's a lot more of it on this channel. The next one might surprise you.